this computer. Greetings of peace. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. We are delighted today in the lead integrity space of reflection and wisdom to have a wonderful speaker with us who is an innovative, remarkable, dynamic leader in her own right, and an example to so many of us across the different age groups, across ethnicities, nationalities, you name it. I'm speaking about Dr. Lina AbiRafeh. Lina, who's permitted me to call her as such, is a global crisis leadership and women's rights strategist with 30 years of experience across more than 20 countries in crises. That includes Afghanistan, Haiti, Mali, and elsewhere. I wonder why we are talking to Lina today, given the state of our world. Lina is also founder and CEO of Better for Women, which is a feminist advocacy practice, and Chaos Leadership, which is her signature framework for leading through crises. She has held senior leadership roles with the United Nations, international NGOs, non-governmental organizations, or in the American context, not-for-profits, but also in academia. She's directed operations, designed strategies that effectively institutionalize protections for women. And she serves on several international boards and is a recipient of several fellowships. Lina is a recognized authority in global policy and a keynote and TEDx speaker, and we will be sharing a link to her TEDx talk in the recording after we have this opportunity, and I strongly recommend that you see and listen to her. Lina is an author of multiple books, and in fact, we are hoping that she will tell us about the latest that she's now just about to celebrate the publication of. But she's also been listed among Gender Equality 100, the most influential people in global policy. So for some of these above reasons and for much more, as you will now hear, we are absolutely delighted to have Lina make some time to talk to us about herself, her ideas, her leadership style, and some of her thoughts on what is going on around us today. And I need to give you all an advance warning. Lina speaks truth and speaks truth to the most powerful. So she's going to be very honest, candid, and clear about her opinions. I do hope that you're going to be comfortable listening. And if you're uncomfortable, there's a good reason for it. She's probably saying something that we need to learn from. After all, this is the house of wisdom. It isn't the house of just being bland and diplomatic and saying nothing. This is about saying plenty and making all of us think. So once again, and without further ado, Dr. Lina AbiRafeh, it is an absolute honor and a pleasure to have you with us here today. Please tell us a little bit about your life's journey to where we're at today.
Thank you so much. The pleasure truly is mine. I have to say, I love being a part of this podcast specifically because of your name, Lead Integrity. I think integrity is such an important word. And going off of that, I think there is a void, an integrity vacuum in what we're seeing today. Yes, we've always seen it, but now more than ever, I feel like we are confronted with so much injustice, inequality, abuse of power, violence against women, total impunity, and we are surrounded by it and frankly feeling quite powerless to all of these forces that are overwhelming us. So for me, if I go back to the beginning, I would say that I've always had that keen sense of injustice, of inequality, of a feeling like something was wrong and it needed to be made right. And that for me was decades ago when I came to that realization, even if I didn't have the vocabulary for it. And now here I am, having dedicated my life to this work and looking around at a world that I don't recognize and certainly feel like I didn't want to see this kind of world that we're in. Mm-hmm. But all the more reason for us to fight it. It's very ironic we're speaking today because tomorrow is so-called American independence, 250 years. And I find it extremely ironic because we talk about independence on the one hand, when half of the population is not free, not free to make decisions about their bodies and their lives, their futures, what to do, where to go, access to opportunities and resources. We are looking at denial of freedom and, frankly, a backlash against half of the population in this country and everywhere around the world. We're looking at increased rates of unsafe abortion, denial of access to safe abortion and healthcare. We're looking at increased rates of maternal mortality, increased violence against women, and a lack of prosecutions. We're looking at sexual offenders in the highest echelons of power, and they're getting away with it. So, what can we say about this so-called independence and the land of the free? We will stare up at the sky tomorrow in awe and see these beautiful fireworks, while on the other hand, there's total silence when we look at what's happening to women and girls in this country and around the world. So I'm very troubled by where we are and what we're seeing and what sort of freedom we're celebrating. I mean, even if we look at the founding fathers, quote unquote, they talked about men, and I think they literally meant it. And that is the situation that we're facing today. All the more reason for us to lead and to do so with integrity. So we've got a big task ahead. The challenges are vast.
Absolutely. And thank you for bringing up that we are indeed on the cusp of July 4th, which is not only the celebration of independence from the British for the Americans. At that time, it was only about 13 states, but this is actually the 250th birthday, if you will, of an independent, free America. And thank you for bringing up the points about how, in fact, the freedom that we treasure and that brought many of us here may not be what we assumed or thought it was, or perhaps it was and has always been under threat. That is a question that I hear amongst many Americans today. Did we get it wrong, or are things really bad now? And I wanted to ask you that question also, Lina. Did those of us who lived outside of the United States misunderstand America, or was there something else going on?
I love this question. I think there's always been a double standard, right? I mean, just to build on the 4th of July and this idea of, freedom of these colonies, we're still colonizing others. All over there is it's just taken on a different form. We're colonizing minds in different ways. So, have we misunderstood, or has it always been like this? Has there always been that deep-rooted discrimination and racism and inequality? And maybe now we've just taken off our rose-colored glasses. Maybe now the veil has been lifted. Maybe now people don't need politicians, leaders don't need to lie about it anymore. They don't need to pretend. I mean, we look at how things have changed in light of this recent administration in the States, removal of women's rights and freedoms, an erasure of DEI policies and practices. So now everybody can just do what they want without taking any of those factors into consideration. A total stripping of multilateralism and a belief in global cooperation. All of these things that have taken us backwards, frankly, lifetimes. So, we have to ask, is this some new and disturbing trend? Or maybe there's always been this kind of movement, but it's just never had a leader and a champion that touts it as shamelessly as what we're seeing right now. And, I'm afraid that I too had different ideas about what this country was and what it could be and the possibilities that it held. But, as a woman, as an immigrant, as a person of color, as an Arab or Arab American, as a Lebanese and Palestinian, I am facing layer upon layer of discrimination that are remind me that so many of my identities that exist in this one body are frankly unwanted and unwelcome by this administration. And yet I am an American citizen. I'm a US taxpayer. Do I not have rights? Do I not have rights to fight, to build something better, to demand justice and equality? I thought I did. But it doesn't feel that way. It doesn't feel that way for a lot of us. That racism, that misogyny that we're seeing, that's just so gruesome and undeniable in our faces. And I find this position that we're in scary and sad.
So, given what you've just mentioned in terms of the multiple identities, the fact that we are living a moment where, by the way, not just this leader, but many other leaders of nations are somehow legitimizing discrimination, discriminatory policies, attitudes, rude language, extraordinarily rude language, so that the counter discourse tends to also adapt and adopt terms which just a couple of years ago would have been deemed rude to say in public fora, but are now increasingly more normal. Wouldn't you say, Lina, that we're kind of living through a crisis in the United States and the world that is magnified by the fact that it's in multiple places and spaces? It is not limited to only one country going through a specific set of circumstances. Would you agree that this is a crisis moment for many parts of the world?
Absolutely. I mean, I think these dangerous perspectives are unfortunately contagious. And we're living in an era of the reign of the bully.
Mm.
Is how I'm seeing it, and an integrity vacuum. You know, to go back to your life's work and purpose, it's made all the more important now because of the situation that we're living in. And you're absolutely right, not just here, but around the world as well. But I think the shock that comes with this country in particular is because it held itself in very high regard. It claimed to be the keeper of human rights and freedoms. It came from that history of equality, welcome immigrants, bootstrapping, you know, this American narrative that we've been fed for generations that doesn't really hold true. So I think the challenge is, how are we going to undo all of this? Will it take generations to rewire? What is this example setting for young people? You know, I think about people like us who we've seen different things, we've seen different countries, we've experienced different perspectives, and we've got a pretty clear moral sense. You know, I feel like we are really guided by our values. We know what it is we're doing and what kind of world we are fighting very hard to build. I look at young people today and I think, wow, what is the lesson for them? The lesson here is that the bully on the playground is always going to win.
Mm. So,
what will that teach you?
great moment to actually ask you the question, because you have served in so many crisis settings much worse than this, where there was hunger, there was aggression that took away lives. It's, if you will, a more extreme sense of pain and desolation, um, of crises, a more extreme crisis. And you write about some of these dynamics, but you also have your own way of having dealt in situations like this. Can you tell us a little bit about what your experience from these different settings throughout your careers? What is it telling you or instructing you or advising you to see as gaps that need to be addressed and how to address them in this moment in the US?
You know, the challenge is that in times of insecurity, we are at greater risk. We tend to see an increase in lawlessness, an increase in violence against women. You know, all of these patterns are shown throughout the world, in this country and everywhere else. You know, whether we're talking about the recent earthquake in Venezuela, which is an absolute tragedy, or we're talking about the political crisis that we're facing in this country, the moral crisis. We are seeing a similar kind of pattern of us against them language, violence, impunity, petty crime, disorder, a discomfort with the other, a denial of rights. I mean, these things just play out over and over again when countries are not moving in the right direction. And yes, that is magnified by a crisis. If there is an earthquake, if there is a war, if there is something that is a very sort of tangible crisis that we can point to and say, ah, that's why. But, at the same time, it happens on a level of morals and values and policies and practices that we're seeing in other countries. As well, we don't need to actually take up arms to feel like we're fighting a battle against values that are denying our own rights and existence.
Mm-hmm.
So what I've seen in other countries is, yes, we know in a situation like a war, when these kinds of things are moving in the wrong direction, early warning indicators that tell us that a society is in trouble. And we're seeing those signs here. We see those signs absolutely everywhere in all of these countries in crisis. And what can we do about it? To answer the second part of your question, for me, I really believe in women's leadership. And what I've seen time and again in every country I've worked in, and even in this one, is that women are the best crisis responders. They are the world's social safety net. They are the ones who know what is happening, who needs help, how to help them. I mean, they have their finger on the pulse of humanity. Now, this is not all women all the time, of course not. But the vast majority, as I have seen, are the ones who organize in their communities, who do it without resources, without titles, without being formally considered in any kind of crisis plan, without being part of a leadership or decision-making table. They still get up and they do it over and over and over again. Venezuela is a great example. I was even reading just the other day that women have already organized around supporting other women with reproductive health needs, responding to cases of violence against women, and they're doing it just because they need to do it and they believe in doing it. And what I see again over and over is that women's movements, women-led, women-focused organizations, or whatever, are the ones that are the least resourced. They are the first to shut down or the first to be sidelined. They are the last to recover, and yet they are the most effective and the most important. They're the ones who are there before the crisis, who will remain long after. This is the lifeblood of recovery. Mm-hmm. And unless we are funding these groups and these movements to do the work that they are already doing, we are missing out on a major opportunity to rebuild the fabric of society.
So is it only a matter of funding, Lina, that seems to be holding women back from saving their societies, as you are articulating, they are born to do and do anyway? Is it really a matter of the lack of resources? Is that it? It boils down to the lack of resources?
Funding is definitely a factor, but of course it's not the only factor. I mean, there is no seat at the table. And even when there is a so-called seat at this proverbial table, women are not given the opportunity to speak, to make decisions, to lead. So there still is discriminatory practice at every single layer of this. Very often, I mean, having worked in many, many humanitarian emergencies, complex situations, and I worked on prevention and protection and response to sexual violence. I mean, one of the hardest issues to address even in so-called peacetime. So imagine in a crisis. And I have been told time and again, this is not important right now. What's more important is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. And I fundamentally disagree. Bodily autonomy and integrity is what women say is important. And they would even risk going hungry if it meant that they were safe. So we are not even being listened to. Our needs are not even being met. We repeat these things honestly like a broken record. We don't even know the magnitude of what is happening and what the experiences are of women and girls because we don't prioritize them in these settings. We might pay lip service to it. We might have the systems and the services that look like they're doing the right thing, but we're not making a dent. And right now, in the situations that we're in, when USAID has been erased, the UN is consolidating, agencies are folding, programs are being erased. The first programs to go are in support of women and gender, sexual and reproductive health and rights, against violence against women. All of those programs were the first to be erased, killed. And that was by political decree.
And I'm playing the devil's advocate here, so bear with me a bit. We have a lot more women in positions of decision making and authority. Many of the national, regional, and international humanitarian relief organizations are today being administered and led by women. Why are we still facing the same challenges, Lina?
First of all, what's important is, yes, women's leadership is critical, but feminist leadership is what I'm after. And it is not about just a woman's body in the seat. It is about what type of woman and what values they espouse. And men can do it too. I would love to see more feminist men in leadership. We don't have that. Part of the problem is when we look at women's leadership, we say, wow, 20%, 30%, or whatever kind of a tick box goal that we've wanted to achieve. That isn't representative of the population. Not yet, not enough. And again, it is not about 50-50 all the time, although that would be very nice. It would be an ideal. It is about advancing women's rights and freedoms within the organizations that are led by women and by men. Look at the UN. Has there ever been a woman secretary general? Why not?
But will it make a difference? What kind of difference? But Lina, what kind of a difference will it make? And are we not putting a remarkably challenging set of expectations on the shoulders of a woman in a system that is, per definition, structurally problematic? Are we not pushing a bit and expecting a bit too much of a woman?
We always expect too much of women, absolutely. But at the same time, to have an institution like this that claims to support women's rights, I mean, just for the optics is not good. Just for the fact that representation matters, and when we see women in those positions, we will take their commitments to women's rights more seriously. We cannot continue to talk this talk without actually doing something about it. I mean, that is one way, it's not a panacea. That is the one way that things will start to change, getting the right women in leadership and having them change those institutions from the inside. God help them, it is going to be hard. It continues to be a fight all the time. It is one step forward and 10 steps back. But what is the alternative? I truly believe in women's leadership, in resourcing women's movements and women's organizations, in giving women a voice at every level, because quite literally, our lives depend on it. And we're not seeing that, and we don't have it.
So the women who are currently in leadership positions are not able to effect the transformations necessary because they're not feminist enough. Is that the analysis?
I would say that for some, yes, absolutely. I mean, they have a very hard fight on the inside. So the blame, to be clear, the blame does not rest on the shoulders of women. It is also about the men in leadership who do not create the space, who do not give women voice or access. We see it that we've coined terms to express what it is. Mansplaining, manals, all of these kind of institutionalized patriarchal structures where we say, wow, there's one woman on this panel, that's amazing, it's representation. We're not even seeing men in power make that change. They bear a huge responsibility because they are the ones that perpetrated this inequality in the first place. What is the role in these kinds of situations of men and boys? Right? If you look at something like violence against women, that is, we call it a women's problem. It's a men's problem. They are by and large the perpetrators. Something is wrong. It is their problem. And they should do much better to end it, to respond to it, to support, to provide the structures and the services. They don't. Their silence condones it. My belief is that we've got a lot of men and boys out there who understand that things are wrong and probably share our views, but are not vocal enough. Why are they silent? And when they are silent, they allow these things to continue. It is a passive endorsement of locker room talk or inequalities in a meeting or on a manel or whatever it is. Very few men will stand up and say, actually, I'd like to hear from her. She started it. It was her idea. She should take ownership of it, and we should give her credit for it. I just don't hear those things often enough. And I think we're missing a huge opportunity there for humanity.
Would you say that the women who are in leadership positions are able to build alliances with the men and like-minded sisters?
I think they are trying. It's hard to generalize about all women in leadership, right? I definitely don't want to do that. I will not lump them in one huge category because we deserve the chance to be diverse as women in our voices and our views. But I think they try. I do see effort being made, but when the politics it works against us, when policies deny our rights, when the resources are stripped from our movements, our work becomes so much harder.
So in the
So
context,
how can you,
sorry,
please.
forgive me, I did not mean to interrupt you, but it was
No,
on point, in a context like that, and this is a general context for sure. Tell us a little bit about your understanding of chaos leadership. How does chaos leadership function? What does it mean? Etc. And where does a better world, a better for women space or world or context then materialize?
So Better for Women was my first child. That is my belief that we can build a better world for women. That is my fight. That is my cause. That is the goal that I have set for myself for my entire life. It's not just my career. It's my purpose. And it might not be achieved in my lifetime, but it does not mean I will not stop the fight for it. That is about equality, rights, justice. That is about me as an individual doing whatever I can in whatever space I occupy to elevate the voices of women, to support the kind of change that we want to see. So Better for Women is just an extension of my existence, actually. Chaos leadership is relatively new. And what's interesting about that to me is that I've spent so many decades in chaos, very broadly defined, not just countries in crisis, but here as well. And we are in situations of sustained chaos. I do not feel like the world is stable. We have so many disruptions that we're seeing. People are fundamentally uncomfortable with what's going on in the world. And there are lessons that we can learn about how to manage that from, firstly, the women that I have seen in chaos, because they are able to join, to rise, to create, to build, to survive in those situations. And for me, it's been remarkable to see these kinds of things. And what can we learn from that to teach everybody else, people maybe in corporate spaces or elsewhere, about how to survive and thrive in chaos? Because that is what we are in. And we are not able to control it. So we might as well learn to lead in it. And that is where chaos leadership was born. And that framework is essentially two things. It's a keynote talk that covers stories from the field, examples, ideas, inspiration, anecdotes, stories of, for instance, what we can learn from women's markets in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, or what we can learn from incidents that I experienced in Afghanistan 20 some years ago, for instance. So all of those stories are packed in the keynote address. And then I have an ebook that is more technical about the tools, the skills, checklists, about how we can better navigate the chaos that we're in.
Fantastic. And this is something that people can find more information about and get access to on your website.
Absolutely. So I have both websites. I have Better for Women with a 4 and Chaos Leadership, and I'll send you all the links so you have them. They are two parts of the same commitment. So one is the passion and the other is the technique, if you will.
Well, that sounds to me like if you combine passion and technique, we definitely equal transformation that is pretty much needed. Lina, maybe share with us an inspiring story from your chaos leadership moments, from some of those. Any story that leaves you still feeling inspired when you think about it. And then I'm going to ask you for some of your advice for the younger ones and some of the older ones from all different kinds of genders. Just what is it that you would ideally like to see happen and that you feel can happen? Should we do ABC? Like what is the way forward? the dream, but also the technique, as you were mentioning. But first, tell us a story that, because I noticed when I listened to your TED Talks, which I listened to it quite a bit, more than once, but you started with a story that was immediately captivating. So tell us a story, Lina.
Well, I started the story of the women's markets in the DRC, so I probably should continue that one. What I noticed from my time in the Democratic Republic of the Congo is this. I was traveling to rural areas and I was learning to see things through the eyes of the women there in communities because I felt like they had a sense of when things were deteriorating and the way they would respond. And what was interesting for me is it became very visual and physical in the women's markets. So when I looked at local community-based women's markets, women selling fruit and flip-flops or whatever kinds of things, when they felt like the situation was deteriorating, before we picked it up in an assessment, before it became obvious, before it was news, they would pack up the market and the market would disappear. So the market would not actually be there. And that, for me, very interestingly, became the barometer because shortly after, if they felt like the situation had stabilized, if they felt secure, if they felt safe, the market would come back. So this idea of women, as I said, with their finger on the pulse, was made for me very tangible with these markets because they just knew, they had a sense that things were deteriorating, and so they were able to respond. And that for me became a measure by which I understood how people were really feeling in that community. You know, we can talk about all the great things that we deliver and do, and X number of packets of this and that, and all the stuff, you know, the metrics that we've got for our wonderful accomplishments. But if people don't feel safe, then we haven't succeeded. And that for me was a very interesting sort of opportunity to understand what feeling safe looks like. So that would be one story. Oh,
Fantastic story, because you're basically sharing how these unknown wiring within the space that women occupy, as an example in that marketplace, they could sense when things were not going too well in that public space, and they packed up and left. But you, as the observer, even as the person providing, or the institution providing the support and service in that particular moment in that same location, would not have been able to see or guess, because it would take until things got really bad for y'all to get to understand it. But they were already in the know and taking action even before you guys had any idea or inkling. That's a brilliant story.
exactly. And imagine if we listen to women and listen to women in communities and let them make those kinds of decisions about when they're feeling unsafe. And we could respond so much faster if we did that, and we could respond in the right ways. You know, there is so much in the world that opens up when you ask people simple questions. I used to ask women all the time, do you feel safe? You know, unfortunately, more often than not, the answer was no. And then I would say, well, what do you need? What will it take to make you feel safe? And they would respond with very concrete things. And if I sometimes was in the power to take those back to other people to say, here's what I've heard, here's what we need to do. But most of the time, as one person, you know, I didn't have that kind of power. But imagine if we listened to that, and imagine if we acted on it. Just that simple question opens up all of these doors to a much more effective response, a more meaningful response at the grassroots where it matters most.
But Lena, what I don't understand is, and the other day, last month, I was in a very prestigious establishment listening to um, a conversation about the status of humanitarian work today. And it was three of the largest humanitarian organizations in the world. And the three were women-led, and the women were extraordinarily competent, very articulate, obviously with remarkable experience. And my question to you is, if it's so simple, listen to the women, why haven't these major organizations manage to figure that out? What?
I ask myself that question all the time. And we keep coming up with ideas and frameworks and little buzzwords. Now we talk about localization, right? When did we start talking about that? It's not
2016.
necessarily new, but it's a no-brainer. Do we really need to tell ourselves that we have to localize? Is that something that okay, so we've put that in our mandates and our mission statements, and we've thrown that word around. Well, in the end, we can talk about it all day in those beautiful board. But until the women in the market in the DRC feel sufficiently localized, we have. And it is a monumental task. I will not say it's easy. I do not have a magic wand that I can wave, nor the secret recipe that I am withholding. Not at all. But can we do better? Absolutely, we can. Absolutely.
And so here you are, you mentioned something about you're looking at the younger folks, and maybe you can tell us exactly who you would consider younger folks. Like what age group are you talking?
You and me. I mean, I was talking about us, actually.
Definitely not me, honey. Definitely not me. But just like who were you reflecting on when you said I look at the young people today and I wonder what are they seeing out of all of this? What would if okay, tomorrow or maybe not tomorrow, but tomorrow in the proverbial
Okay.
tomorrow in the proverbial sense, you are the Secretary General of the United Nations. Okay. You're elected by X amount of countries and so on. What would you do, Lina? What would you do? Give an example. You've worked in that system for decades. Give an example of a few things that you think are an absolute necessary must that can be done given the remarkable difficulty of working with members states on the Security Council who don't see eye to eye on a whole bunch of extraordinarily simple matters, I would say, but also very complicated matters. What would you do with that kind of and that kind of
I mean, this doesn't answer your question about my advice for young people. We got to do that.
No, we're going to do the advice for young people later. But let's do big because we are talking about the world's major issues, and you're right.
Let's go big. Let's go big. You know what I would do? First of all, I would make sure the system is truly democratic because right now it's not. Because the Security Council and the fact that our entire world is hijacked by 5 countries, to me, is not a democratic system. And if I was Secretary General, if I was a country that was not part of that structure, I would say, my voice means nothing. It's like the Electoral College here in the States. We need to disband these kinds of archaic structures and genuinely create a system that is democratic, where everybody is treated equally. One person, one country, one vote, that's it. So that is the first thing I would do, day one. And I would make sure that we are clear in what membership in this institution means, that we have come together because we believe in equality, we believe in global governance, we believe in cooperation, we believe in multilateralism. And if we don't, we cannot be in the playground together. There has to be consequences. I mean, I see countries insulting the UN, violating the UN Charter, shredding it, and yet they remain. I do not think that demonstrates that we take this seriously. We have come together because we share certain values, and those who do not should leave or be kicked out. So that is what I feel very strongly. And we cannot allow, I don't believe in violence as a response, but we cannot allow us to continue to observe situations where there is egregious violence without acting, protecting, doing something meaningful to stop it, holding states to account. Because how many conflicts are we seeing in the world right now? I mean, 100+ conflicts, that's insane. For me, I understand why the UN was created, but I believe that it exists in a way to save us from ourselves, to make us better. Is it making us better? Is it? Right now, I don't, and I believe in that more than anything else. I believe in multilateralism. I want to see that institution strengthened. I want to see the states all feel like they are members on equal standing, and that they have come together because they agree and they are ready to defend and protect and take action. That's day one, but don't ask me about day two, because that's probably even more ambitious. That's just the first day.
All right. Well, I can't wait. So
I might even move it out of the States, actually, because
where would you move it to?
oh, that's going to be difficult to say. I don't know. I haven't canvassed the rest of
Well,
the
why
world,
would
but
you
I
move
do
it out
feel
of the
like
States? Okay, then say why would you move it out of the States? You said you might even move it out of the States. Why would you consider that?
first of all, because I believe in representation. And if we're talking about the global majority, the voice of the global majority, housing the world's multilateral body in the US, to me, sends the wrong signal. I want to house it somewhere in the global majority, firstly. Secondly, I feel like with this current administration and with some in the past, they are not welcome, not supportive of the UN. They do not practice what the UN espouses. They do not believe in the United Nations. They do not believe in United Nations as a concept. Why stay? Why stay? Also, I mean, if to put it very crudely, for all those reasons, the morals and values and integrity, but to put it crudely, the UN in New York is its own economy. It is providing how many staff are there in New York? How much money is spent in New York? How many convenings happen in New York? How many people are renting apartments and buying sandwiches and putting their kids through school? So this is an economy that, if it was removed, would seriously damage the city. I mean, it would make a pretty big dent, let's say. That is a contribution to the American economy that maybe would be better spent elsewhere, other countries, other economies. It's worth thinking about.
Yes, I think it is being thought about. I'm fairly sure it is being thought about, and that there are a number of member states who have actually put proposals for that kind of relocation and the pros and cons of it and so on. And before they put the proposal forward, they've obviously studied the pros and the cons quite a bit. But yeah, there are. So your finger is on the right pulse, so to speak. But then thank you for that. I think it's important to hear the experience of those who are products of the system to some extent and are continuing to believe in it, because I think it's extremely challenging to hear only the negative narratives, and this is a time where negatives everything dominate. Negatives about people, negatives about cultures, negatives about religions, the negative dominates so much that it's actually quite jarring and deeply unhealthy. So it's very important, I think, to hear those who are passionate enough, committed enough, and competent enough, able to, like yourselves, able to articulate these alternative visions and the good rationales for them. I think that's extremely healthy in and of itself. It may or may not happen, but we need the visions. We need the aspirations. We need the clarity of the voices and the multiplicity of them in order to be able to feel that there's hope. So I want
exactly. I mean,
yeah, go ahead. Go no, go for it.
I was going to say, the UN is only as strong as its member states, right? And I think that needs to be made very clear. And so to deny them their own voice in that process is very dangerous and sidelines them, so they do not feel like they have any role or any power, any stake even in this process. And at the same time, the UN is so complicated. It's not a monolith, right? For me, we're talking about agencies that are very diverse in their focus, in their resourcing, jostling for power very often, lots of rivalries. I know we've had UN reform attempts time and again, but is there a better way to also organize the agencies themselves? And bearing in mind that the UN is fueled by its people. And the people that I have had the pleasure and privilege to work with and to learn from have been extraordinary. For the most part, the people on the ground, and I've never worked in New York. I have only ever worked in countries in crisis on the front lines. Not a day have I spent in headquarters. So for me, seeing the people that I have worked with side by side lead with integrity is a reminder that it is fueled by good people who are doing good and want to do better. And I think that needs to be celebrated and that needs to be acknowledged. And if the institution itself isn't recognizing and serving that, that is the lifeblood right? It's the people who are out there who are doing the work of this United Nations. That's what we need.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. I think that it's very easy to identify the faults in a system, in that universe of the United Nations system. It's very easy to identify the faults. And as you said, it's only as strong as the member states. So if you focus on the member states, you'll see where the weaknesses are. It's much more challenging to identify the strength. And I completely agree with you that the strength, the main strength in that system is the people who work it. And very often we don't hear about that unless a calamity happens and they get killed on duty. We don't actually celebrate the real power of the United Nations
Yeah.
system, its staff, its people, whose commitment, to be honest, is unparalleled, I believe. I've served for over 20 years within, around, about, partnering in every way possible. I've served in the UN system, and I can tell you, I completely couldn't agree more with the idea that the most important part is the fuel of it, and that's the people in it. And no, I don't think that they're acknowledged or honored the way that they should be.
Exactly.
But I think that's a really important point. Thank you for sharing it. All right, now let's look at the 20-something-year-olds who are already entering the job markets around the world, where they have an opportunity to do so. Many of whom are on the unemployment lines in the global south also, but also here in the north. I'm finding it very difficult to feel the meaningfulness of their employment. This is one of the calamities on the list of many challenges that the world is facing, is decent work. And we see that amongst 50 plus years old and retirees and people who didn't want to be retired but we also see it very much amongst the 20-year-olds. What would you say to them, Lina? And let's look at those in the United States, because this is a moment when we're celebrating 250 years of this very young country and nation's existence. What would you say to fellow Americans who are in their 20s? What would your advice, but not only advice in sort of the patriarchal or, parochial sense, but what would you want to say to them?
Firstly, I would celebrate the fact that they are far more aware than we were in our 20s, at least for me. I'll speak for myself.
Definitely. With you. Totally with you there.
So I admire that. That's due, yes, in part to the internet and how aware we are of everything going on around the world, but also their own understandings of the world, of the values that they want, of their beliefs. I see these beautiful movements of young people in this country and around the world that have said, enough. We want a different world. We want something better. We're ready to go to the streets or do whatever it's going to take to fight for it. And that means understanding our role in this global web, what happens in other countries that also affects us. I think that is beautiful and important. The sense that we are all connected in terms of climate, in terms of conflict, in terms of other issues that now we see are crossing borders and affecting all of us. Maybe it took COVID for us to understand that nobody is immune and nobody is powerful and can live in a bubble, that we're all interconnected and everything is going to impact all of us. So the time to rise up and to care about each other is now. And I see them doing that. I was so inspired by young people in the Arab region and their movements and their belief in intersectionality and the organic way they take on all of these issues. They're not part of formal structures or NGOs or registered with the ministry of this or that. They just care enough to take to the streets and fight for change in these beautiful, fluid, inclusive ways. I loved it so much. I learned so much about it. I wrote a whole book about it. So for me, watching young people's movements, I live in New York City right now. Everywhere I turn, there's a protest about something. There's a movement about something. There is an understanding that things aren't going right and a desire to fix it. And that is what is most inspiring about young people right now. They're aware, they're awake, they're alert, they're concerned, and they're doing something about it. I keep saying for all of us, yes, there's a lot of opposition, and we talk about the opposition, and that is, our big fear, and that is the enemy, whatever the opposition is. But our own apathy is an enemy. That is a problem. The fact that we can look at the world, or we might look at the world and say, my God, there's so many things going badly. What can I do? I don't know what to do. I can't do anything. I'm not going to do anything. That's it. That is the danger for me. And these young people don't have that problem. That's not a problem of this generation of the 20-somethings. They are worried about the world, about the environment, about wars that are being provoked by powers like this one. They are worried about AI, the job market, the cost of living. They know all of those things. And the fact that they are vocal about them, I think, is extraordinary. So I would firstly applaud that. And I would tell them, keep going. Keep going, and also look at, us of the other generation, the not so old and not entirely decrepit, we're still hanging in there. There are a lot of ways to fuel these movements in a way that's intergenerational. I learned so much from these young people. I love when they come to me and say, hey, help us do this and that, help amplify our movements. What do you think about this strategy or the other? I think that for me is extraordinary, tapping into everybody's expertise, and looking at everybody's different perspectives and appreciating the diversities, not just the diversities we think of, sex and race and religion, but also age and other things, and having curating those kinds of global conversations that are going to be the ones that make change. Just for me, very simply and very personally, looking at how many young people in this country now recognize what's happening in Palestine. Mm-hmm. That is remarkable. I never imagined that in my lifetime, I would see that level of awareness and understanding, and that it would manifest as action. Now, it has come at a very high cost. There is a lot of work to do, but at the same time, people are awake and are paying attention and are going out of their way to learn and to listen. And I would say, the best things that we can continue to do is to listen to each other and to learn from each other. If you're wondering what's going on with women in Afghanistan or with Venezuelan earthquake recovery, ask the people who are implicated. Listen to them, amplify their voices, support their causes, do what you can to take your cue from those people who are right there, because that's where the change is going to happen. And like I said, it could start with a simple question. You ask people what they need and they will tell you.
Dr. Lina AbiRafeh, it's been an absolute pleasure listening to you. It's a bit like this very benign but very powerful bolt of passionate electricity going through one's psyche and soul. And for that alone, I think, thank you so very much. And I look forward to hosting you again when you have an opportunity to showcase your book. You didn't say anything about that. Maybe just a couple of words, please, Lina, because the title alone is
coming out in September.
Feminist
there we go.
Starter. Feminist
Activism for an Unraveling World. And why did I write this book? It is because I wanted people, individuals, not career activists, not senior leaders or policymakers, but anybody, everybody on the street in the world, to see that they can do something and they should do something. And what it does is encourage everybody to be a fire starter. And it profiles people who are what I call the ordinary extraordinary, people who are everyday, who decided that this was a line that has now been crossed for them and that they want to stand up and do something about it. And very often they did very simple things in the space that they occupy. And taking that action meant a change. And it's in these small actions. With my first TEDx talk, I said, start where you stand. Start in the space that you occupy, that in your school, in your home, in your community, in your workplace, wherever you can. Don't take on the world, take on your microcosm. And if you do that, and everybody did that, there you go. Then we're done. And we can see it happen in our lifetime. And imagine that.
Superb. Thank you very much. Lina. Wonderful, wonderful to hear you. And I will make sure that all the links that you want people to see after the talk or even before the talk are there as we share this amazing talk with the rest of
Thank
the
you so
world.
much. I want everyone to just reach me with ideas, with questions, with whatever. There are synergies to explore. I am wide open and ready for them.
Fantastic. Thank you so very, very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.